Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for being here at the end of the day. I'm Eric Balchernik. I'm an instructor in the online clinical mental health counseling program at Commonwealth University. And I'm just going to talk with you today about some things I learned from conducting classroom research in advanced clinical mental health seminars and teaching practicum classes. The data I'm going to talk about is from the last 5 years, probably from fall of 2018 to like spring of 23. I'll kind of talk about the robust points and some backstory, but hopefully it'll lead to some tips and things that you might use if you're instructing or if you're consuming those courses. I don't think any of it's going to sound new. It's just nice when there's some data behind it to corroborate maybe your experience or things that you've heard or I'll jump out and share the slides here and we can get going. If you have any questions as we go, please just stop and just jump in there. I'm gonna wheel it back. There we go. And hopefully everyone can see all right. Okay. All right, let me advance this. There we go. So really, the rationale for collecting this data is really about self-improvement as an instructor, but also I came from the clinical world. I had been practicing for about 16 years before I went back for my PhD, and so I was really familiar mostly with working in agencies and private practice settings. And I learned as an instructor in higher education that often students who were coming to the class had a lot of experience and had some supervision experiences, but not necessarily training supervision in a classroom as part of the program. And there's a reliance on supervisors teaching those courses, instructors slash supervisors, to provide direction and structure. So this is really what this is about, including some tips for you. I also included a little blurb in there about, what the next steps might be. These could be translated into research questions. This is going to be others' work, not mine, but I thought I'd plug it. So moving forward, really going to expose you to three different styles, which really are factors that came from the data that represent learning styles from groups of students that we evaluated over time, and some strategies, to help them prepare and navigate specifically practicum courses. And then I'll talk indirectly, but there's a link in there about a classroom level approach, or really a classroom research as a style or approach to doing this type of work. Hopefully we get there. Everything that I do to begin really is rooted in adult learning. That was my one of my research areas when I was on the tenure track. But when I teach or when I supervise or when I do anything in a professional role, I try to ground the work that I'm doing in solid learning principles. And there's a reference there, I think, a nice summary of the science of learning by Diane Borders from UNCG. But thinking about learners' prior knowledge, the way they organize and process information, it may be typical or atypical, divergent, a motivation level, and motivation level isn't all that's required in order to learn, but sometimes it can be overly emphasized. Progressive skill acquisition and application. This is a big task in field experience courses and the didactic or the content courses that precede it. It's a shift from working with students' peers, doing role plays and that kind of thing, into talking about work with clients in applied settings in practicum classes. So that's a major developmental shift as well. Strategies need to be goal directed and focused and not abstract, and have evidence of feedback, getting used to helping students learn how to give and receive and process and respond to feedback, but also as an instructor, thinking about how do you do that? How well do you do that? How focused is it? Is it consistent over time? The climate of the classroom is 6. That's another one. Thinking about, instructors as part of the culture of the classroom, but also at the head of the power dynamic related to all of that. So, and then 7, the ultimate goal, at least for me, and it dovetails with learning science, is at the end of this, maybe not at the end of one practicum course, but at the end of training, individuals need to learn how to direct themselves, even if it's knowing when to seek consultation or ask for help. And you can see some evidence of that even within a course or the development of a supervisee. But ultimately, that's the goal. Because when a person leaves a program, they're under supervision for a while longer. But ultimately, then when you're in independent practice, you need to be able to direct yourself, including when to seek help from others. And also your own learning or how quickly you acquire knowledge or apply it or rule it out. So I like to ground everything in that, the study included. Classroom research really is the vehicle then. It's a process of using a method. For this presentation, we're talking about Q methodology. And I can answer any questions you have about that, but it's a mixed method approach that really is intended to show patterns and perspectives or viewpoints of the participants. And it uses an instrument that's derived from communication devices, instruments, articles, things that are written, things that are spoken and obtained through focus groups. And it's distilled down into a set of statements that people rank order in a forced choice. It looks like a bell curve. And then it's subjected to quantitative statistics, intercorrelation, and then factor analysis. We also did qualitative stuff with the individual as well. But the point of all of this is really to improve instruction in the classroom experience. Student learning is at the center of all this. And yeah, if you're on the tenure track, you need publications, so that's part of it. But for me, that's not part of it anymore, which is nice. Any questions or comments so far? Clarifications? We good? Okay. So a little bit about the method. As I mentioned, we collected data for 5 years. There's about 112 students, 3 different instructors, and we would be the, quote, researcher for each other's classes to circumvent any dual roles. The qmethod.org site, if you're curious about this method, is a great place to go to look at and get different pieces of literature and demonstration videos and things like that. And I'd highly recommend it if you're curious, either now or at the end of this. So the instrument that we use for this particular study that I'm going to talk about in a practicum class was derived from items that come from several different documents in the counseling supervision literature that are authored by known experts, people who have a lot of experience, a lot of publications, a lot of impact on the process of supervision. And so we talked about using articles and sources in the research that the students themselves and the doc students helping with the classes were required to read and use and consume and be assessed on. And as I mentioned, it's mixed methods, and I'll talk a little bit about the viewpoints or the data that was derived from the study. As you can see then, as we mentioned in the objectives, there's 3 distinct learning styles that came from the research itself, 3 different factors. It just represents groups of individuals' views or a factor view. And we named each of these a learning style. And so from all the students that we talked with and interviewed and had them rank order the statements and that kind of thing, after we factor analyzed all that data, we got 3 different factors that we call dutiful, discerning, and expressive learners. These are the students in the practicum classes. So in each of these columns, in factor 1, the dutiful learner, if you look down the column, the characteristics of that factor, which means, this is sort of an aggregate viewpoint of a particular type of learner, is about keeping boundaries, and following procedures and policies of graduate programs, arriving on time, and being prepared. This is the prototypical, we want beginning practicum students for the first time to be dutiful. And what's interesting about this factor is the instructors and the doc students that were in the sample always loaded on this factor. They were always associated with being dutiful. And if you think about being a prac student and the anxiety you might have felt, or being an instructor for it, you may have always hoped that, hey, if we walk through this together and we stay on track here, things are going to go well, and there's certainly reasons for following procedures and policies for client safety, for student safety. So it's not a matter of not doing that, but this is what's emphasized in the viewpoint of the dutiful learner. And it really aligns with a lot of the biases and also the mission of course instructors. sometimes it becomes a default for evaluating a student's performance. However, the reason why we did this study was that if you only see students as dutiful learners, then oftentimes things get missed in student learning styles or ways they may approach the class, but more importantly, the way that the instructor should approach the class. It's like a chat. Ah, cool. Hey, Kelly. It's weird talking and not being able to see you. Not that I don't like seeing you, Christy. It's really, it's cool, but it's a thing that I'm getting used to. Okay. So we want to expand our viewpoint on there's more than one learning style. We don't want to bias our approach to teaching practicum. So the factors also revealed that there's a different type of learner, a discerning learner that's really willing to reach out and ask for help and wants to receive feedback about skills. This might be someone in our qualitative interviews who's had some experience in mental health, who comes in not brand new, and that sort of thing. They value organization and they want to use good judgment when approaching the supervision situations because they're driven and motivated to do a good job. All the students across these factors were, but this is salient in their viewpoint. Also, a willingness to work with the supervisors around getting the feedback and providing, and implementing the feedback and improving their skill sets is also a hallmark of the factor. So that's important because oftentimes you have folks with diverse experiences, ages, and all sorts of things. I even know in my classes, a lot of the folks in some of the classes have some sort of experience in the profession, so then the third factor, what we learned from the data, was that there's an expressive learner, okay, emphasizing opportunities to be vulnerable with their supervisors. So using the moments and the relationship and the emotional undergirding of learning, which I would say that if you don't feel something in a particular situation, you're not really going to encode the information and store it and recall it again. So learning by its nature is an emotional experience. Managing personal and interpersonal issues were deemed important because these learners use themselves as frame of references in ways to try to filter what they needed to do or to try to bracket issues that they may have been bringing to the table, because we know many people in our profession have issues themselves and may or may not have had exposure to counseling or support. And this is salient in the conversations and viewpoints of expressive learners. And then also valuing demonstration of communication skills and the ability to be pluralistic in your thinking. The show me type of perspective or attitude. And this provides, challenges to instructors as well, to stay current, to be able to talk out loud, to be humble, to be immediate in the way that they handle issues. Expressive learners in this particular population of individuals or more or less non-traditional, or people coming into programs with a significant amount of experience. Okay, questions, comments, criticisms? No, we're moving. Okay, it's advance. Okay, so some considerations for supervisors working with dutiful learners. And you'll see these parenthetical numbers here they relate back, and I hope I can get you these materials. They relate back to the 7 learning principles. So we crosswalk the data outcomes with the theoretical learning pillars. And so for dutiful learners, I just wanted to highlight a couple that I think are, for purposes of keeping things moving here. For dutiful learners, they're typically beginners or matriculating students, identifying general skills and how to apply them, where, when, and how. And you can use a formal instrument like this, counseling competency scale that's revised, usually has lists of skills and dispositions. And these are the kinds of things where you show visually what the skill is, reflection of meaning. That's deeper, that's not just a feeling, but it's also an interpretation of the things around the feeling. I'm feeling nervous because I can't see individuals and I don't want to be perceived as someone who, yeah, you get the idea. So, but having some kind of formal reference point for this particular type of learner can be helpful in using it. And also teaching how to provide and respond to feedback by modeling it, but also, hey, if you're in a class and you're with a group of your peers in a practicum class and you want to give them feedback, there needs to be some rules for engagement. You can't just assume everyone understands how to give constructive feedback, particularly if they don't have the prior learning experiences of doing counseling or sort of looking at and dismantling and then looking at the big picture of a work sample, particularly if it's new and they're nervous. And so instructors right away, I think a lot of times it can be written, it can be spoken, but it's not always demonstrated or modeled consistently that, hey, when I'm asking you for feedback or we're doing that, do you know how to do it? And do you as the instructor know how to structure it and give examples of it and scaffold it? Okay, moving forward. So when we think about discerning learners, then we want to think about, this is for instructors. I think being able to demonstrate skills and talk out loud about your level of comfort level using a skill as the instructor can then set the stage for asking the same of this particular learning style. So if you can show it, and if it goes well, great. If it doesn't go well, you can model humility and make corrections in there and then draw parallels to it. But it also keeps you on your toes to say, hey, do I know how to show this or talk about this with my students in a way that makes sense to what their task is at hand? And if you don't, and you move back into, and I've observed this in so many classrooms, if you move back into an abstraction or talk about it from a theoretical perspective with this learning style, it's not going to work. It doesn't register the same way. It doesn't pass the so what test, right? So, for example, in a pre-practicum class that I'm working on right now, they're getting ready to do an information gathering session. And so how do you structure that and talk out loud, with your client about, hey, what are some items I can put into, the opening for this particular activity? Hey, do you have any questions about the consent form? Can we talk about that a little bit? This is going to be a little bit different than maybe other sessions where I'm going to be asking a lot of questions and focusing a lot about what brings you in so we can develop a roadmap together, et cetera. And then processing that and asking other folks, what do you think? How might you come up with some ways, a spiel for the opening minutes of a session, et cetera. Keeps you on your toes, very important. And in observing others teaching, it's tacit, but not always observable. Another big thing with this particular learning style is identifying and processing anxiety, but not in a way that's sort of folded into an assignment like question number 4, like let's talk about your reflection, but like stopping in the moment and talking about using immediacy about what you're feeling right now. Are you feeling anxious about this? And also modeling times when you felt that way to kind of normalize it, to bring it into the space that it's part of the process and it's actually strange to not have anxiety as part of the process. And also to open the door for individuals who might want to do some one-on-one work around that. Okay, moving forward. And finally, some considerations for expressive learners. And this is something that where if you use the factor as a way to kind of generalize but not assume, someone who is an expressive learner really values the idea of what they already know and the ability to be vulnerable and that kind of thing, as we said. And so, but oftentimes a mistake that can be made is that they're at a place of self-direction maybe sooner than they may believe they're in a self-directing place and really they're not. Or maybe you may, as the instructor, believe that um, the opposite of that. So vice versa, right? And so you want to make sure, like, can a person synthesize their prior learning experiences? Can they talk about what their task is at hand? And a great way to do this, in my opinion, when you're trying to get a sense of like, where are they at? They're non-traditional, they're a little older, they have a ton of experience. Have them talk out loud after you've provided some structure for how to provide feedback or talk out loud about a case and just listen to where they're at. Listen to, do they synthesize what they've observed, with the task that the task at hand, with the skills that are used, and the client's response and what to do next. I mean, that's a lot of steps, but without prompting, folks who may be more advanced or more developed and that kind of thing, or are able to bring in their prior experience and transfer some of that, are a little bit better at big picture thinking and connecting dots like that. The other thing that stands out for this particular learning style as an instructor is using the consultation role a little bit more. So I think about the Bernard model, where you wear the counselor, the teacher, or the consultant hat, the discrimination model. Here, you'd wear a consultation hat if you determined that this person was really in a more advanced state of learning or process of learning and had transferred their experience or was able to process information on a zoom in and zoom out kind of way, toggling between the two perspectives, big picture, small picture. Some supervisors like to use a formal process of interpersonal process recall, where they're using a work sample and stopping and asking someone to process and talk out loud about their rationale behind the things that they've done. Or you could use data gathering. You could use a scale, like the power dynamic scale, to talk a little bit about how they view being vulnerable or what they feel helps them feel empowered. And that can give you data. And you want everyone to fill that, obviously, to see to what degree do you want to bring that kind of a provoking, climate, provoking type of supervision style into the room and that sort of thing, or is that something that you want to think about individually and so forth? Any questions so far? Everyone good? All right. So to sum up, there's two types of data here, and I didn't include 10 slides about the qualitative data, but because I want to emphasize the Q data, but using student-generated factors, because these factors were generated from the students' Q sorts when they were factor analyzed and that kind of thing. So we introduced the instrument from expert and consensus opinion in the literature, but the students decided how they wanted to prioritize that information by rank ordering what was important before we subjected it to analysis. If you didn't take that particular approach, you may default into, a dutiful sort of style. Like, look, this is the game plan. These are the rules and regs. This is the way we want to go. This is what you need to accomplish. But the point of this was to really think, okay, if you took this information that everyone needed to work within the class and asked people to prioritize it in ways that they felt were important and reflective of their learning style, this is what we got. We got three different perspectives instead of just one. And then how do you know? I mean, I think you can use, if you get data like this, I don't know, it might not be super practical or helpful, but the concept of aligning instructor and student views on their role specifically, how do you prepare for a class like this? What's your understanding of how to receive and provide feedback? And what is your perspective on what constitutes a successful supervision experience? And if a person is drawing on prior knowledge and experience, they may have nothing to compare it to. So, this may be new and require instructor to be more dutiful in their approach at one point, but then, maybe more consultative, as the students learn, as the semester unfolds and as you see examples of their work and their performance in the classroom. And then finally, when you think, we also did a lot of qualitative interviews, and every student and every instructor really agreed that empathy needed to be part of the picture. And lucky me, that spun off into some other kind of a product that helped me, and it doesn't matter anymore. So what matters is what we're doing to help students. And so I think understanding students' needs relative to the goals of the course. So this is really important for an instructor to show that kind of empathy. And you can capture that by saying, or talking about, like, how do you know that this course will be helpful if this were your last day? You can maybe take sort of a solution-focused approach if this were your last day. Or what do you believe you need to know and be able to do as a result of completing this practicum course? And ask that question again. So you're getting some baseline information and kind of, also demonstrating, your viewpoint in there too. Well, here's what I think. I don't think that you need to know everything, because if you were able to demonstrate it all, there would be no point of you being in the course. Specifically, this is what I mean. Um, Most importantly, affirming backgrounds, students' identities, and the intersections that influence the learning space, specifically from the instructor and the group, the dynamics of those. Initially, this research project started out as like trying to help someone who was having trouble teaching, and it sort of evolved into like a proactive type of thing. Whereas some instructors were just approaching training supervision as you need to do the things the way that I say you need to do them, and these need to be the data outcomes, and that's that. And some of that partially might be right. Like, if someone expresses any evidence of suicidal ideation, you don't just say, I don't agree with that perspective, right? So there's things you have to do, but oftentimes instructors that I helped and I consulted with were having problems with defaulting into this dutiful mode, and we're having a lot of conflict with students. And so expressing a need for students to feel safe and grow up from their mistakes is something that you can say as part of a speech for the first class that you meet, but it's something that you need to show. And you need to show it by giving specific feedback with affirmations, both individually and within the group, consistently. Noticing, pausing, and connecting with students when you sense something going on that's negative with them. That could be anxiety, it could be frustration, it could be a number of things, but also within yourself. You can use that immediacy if you're processing something, if you're using a work sample, if you're talking about a topic, or in the individual supervision session. And so sometimes modeling that, but then quickly not making it about you, but turning it back to, what goes on for you, or what are you experiencing or feeling right now when you see this, to try to find some alignment around the feltness of what's going on with the work can be helpful. So that's that. Let me move ahead. The Q sample references, I have them in here. Each of these documents, we went in and we extracted either the statements from the formal instrument that they had, or we went through and actually coded and took excerpts from the articles and assembled them in a structured way, and dithered it down almost like we were doing a qualitative study. So sort of a data reduction process. But if anyone's interested in that and wants to nerd out on that, we can talk. Um, I think that is all the slides. Questions, comments? Forget about it. I want out of here. I wanted to leave room to talk, so since it's 15 minutes. Makes sense? Didn't make sense? Okay, Nicole, you found it interesting? Again, thank you.
I know that you alluded to this, but can you maybe speak a little bit more about the details of how you started this research? So you
Mhm.
talked about it a little bit, but maybe give us the story of that a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. Um, I had a colleague who was receiving regular complaints from students about being, and I'll put the quotes around draconian as an instructor. And so people were nervous, they were scared, um, they were some people were being asked to repeat the class that maybe should have, but some didn't need to repeat the class. And so there were things like that. So this instructor was in peril, and we didn't know what to do about it. And the department chair was talking about it. And because they obsess about talking about research, I'm like, well, I'm a teaching researcher, blah, blah, blah. And there's a process for teaching observation that's part of the tenure and promotion process for universities. And so it sort of started out as a conversation like around an intervention. And because the person that I worked with had such a strong research perspective, that can give you some clues about the context right there. that I thought, well, the only way to reach this person is really to be kind, but also try to speak the language that they would understand. So we turned it into a research project. And the common complaint, first it was a formal thing, and then it moved over. The common complaint was like they don't listen, you know, it's their way or the highway. And
And when
so,
and when you proposed this, when this was completed and then maybe given, did the link from theory to practice happen? Did that change? Or you don't have to say if it changed, and I'm going to assume it's somewhere else, but I don't know. So, um, you could say still in progress too. That's fine.
well, I mean, all I can say is that for the students, it changed between the time that I intervened, the department intervened, and the end. But then for them, it turned a corner, and the crisis was averted, if you will. And then structurally, a change was made with who was teaching the class. Somebody who is a counselor needed to teach that class. That was a big problem. So we got the program thing sorted out, and the students had a better experience the second half because we tracked it, and that sort of thing. And we solved some problems at the student level. But then the success really came from like trying to do this, and I used it as a learning experience continuously for myself and two other colleagues. I talked to them about this. I didn't disclose who it was, obviously, but I talked about what happened, and we were at a conference talking about all this, and we decided to just start systematically, like externally reviewing each other's classes. And they liked Q, they were Q nerds like me, and so we just started working on stuff, together. And there's only one time segment was extracted and published to illustrate the process of the research and how to use Q, not to show N size or anything like that, in case anybody was interested in taking a classroom research approach to like self-improvement as a teacher. And you don't have to use Q, you can use all kinds of different methodologies, but that happened to be one that we used as an illustration. But I never used it as a way to posture myself with my research agenda or anything like that. It was just really practice. Yeah. Did that answer it?
It did, thank you. And
Okay. Yeah.
it really was a change process, and it was helping bring voice to the students.
That's it. I'm all about that. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Yeah. Are you comfortable expanding on that? How does it work?
Yeah, so I just decided that like I kind of came into a new role and wanted to make sure that everybody was able to feel comfortable and realizing that some people can take that direct feedback and other people need a lot of compliments thrown in there. So,
The
um
sandwich.
yes, I'm definitely the sandwich. So for me, it was super important to ask and find that out so that they could hear what I was telling them. But also that opens the door for them to be able to give me feedback as well. Um, and I always encourage them to do that because not everyone's the same and they might need a more direct approach of, hey, this is the theory I want you to go try, or this is the intervention I want you to go try, or you have the other side of the coin where some people like to just kind of process out loud and give you their idea of where they should go, or does this sound right? So you just have to be pretty flexible with each person and what they need.
That's right. Yeah, thanks for expanding on that a little bit. It makes me think about that alignment if we tie it back to what we were talking about, like, are we on the same page? That's the phrase that always comes back into my mind when I'm supervising. Are we on the same page? Am I pushing them to be on my page, or should I leave them be on their page, or is it like a Venn diagram of pages where we need to be somewhere in the middle, you know? It's little things like that that I learn from it, probably as much or more than the data, that helps me sort of listen and think on my feet and be responsive, and not like, I think early on I would start to feel like that's wrong, you know, and so I would start to go down the wrong, that's wrong trench, and then I wasn't hearing anything. So that whole idea of alignment, you know, helped me a lot. I like the how you're thinking about that. Hopefully some of that, what we talked about or what I talked about, relates in some kind of way, you know, to what you're experiencing. Anyone else have experience to share? You think about the information specifically resonate with you, one particular piece of it, or a feeling about it, love it, hate it? Hmm. Lauren, you mentioned the difference between children's learning styles and change over time in adulthood. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I've done a lot of work in schools, and you kind of see how they take different approaches in teaching kids and how to learn things. And then you kind of get into adulthood, and it's like, this is how we do it at the end. And it doesn't really take that same consideration, yeah, or take that same approach into consideration. But Alyssa and I actually work for the same agency, and that seems to be across the board that supervisors check in often, and they're like, okay, what do you need? How do you want to go about this? Because I even know myself, like I learn by doing. And so this semester is my first time having a master's level student. I've had bachelor's level students before, and so I have told that
Ah,
student, hey, I know I learn by doing. So if I miss something or you have a question, just ask me because I might not think about it. But I don't think like in other fields or even necessarily in some programs that's encouraged. It's just kind of like, here it is, you're going to take it my way, and that's the end.
yeah, yeah. Thanks for expanding. That phrase, learn by doing, is it okay if I just talk about that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm thinking about, like, you know, what that would mean in a prac class if someone said I learned by doing, you know, like, does that mean that you actually you need to be in front of the client to actually implement the skill, you know, and you're not going to be able to learn it until you're actually there doing it. And so, you know, and this isn't me picking at you. It's
No.
just like, that to me would be an opportunity. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, like, okay, I want to give you feedback on that, but I also, like, I'm interested to know what that means. And it seems like it has relevance for you. Would it have relevance for our work or your work with
Mhm.
clients, you know? Have you experienced that with supervisees, or
A
talking about
little
that
bit.
phenomenon?
Yeah, I tend to just be able to answer things with a more concrete idea, or, kind of like in theory, if this were what's happening, because a lot of things vary client to client.
They
And so
do.
people are looking for a black and white answer. I'm like, it's more gray than that. So give me the
Ooh,
specifics. And that's kind of where I learn by doing. It's like, yeah, I can give a textbook answer for a theory on something, but when it comes down to skills and interventions and things, like, yeah, that, like, we need to know what's going on. Let's just act like they're here so we can figure it out. And
yeah.
I'm trying to think back to my practicum days, which feels like forever ago. But I went to the University of Scranton, so our practicum looked very different. I'm not sure if anyone here is familiar with that program, but our practicum is actually on campus, built into our floor for our program. So there are about 5 or 6 practicum offices, and then we have a big practicum room where everybody meets and can do their work. And our clients are actually undergraduate counseling students from the school. So they
Mhm.
are expected to attend sessions, and then we are expected to run them with them. So we're kind of automatically practicing independently, but then much more individual supervision with weekly recordings and then group supervision and things like that. So that was the other thing where I was like, whoa, how do we teach skills with practicum right away rather than, hey, you did practicum, now you're coming into internship.
Any look backs on that for yourself or anyone else? Like, when you think about that experience as a student and then you look back?
I'm really glad that that's how they did it, because if I, had to find somewhere else to go for practicum, I probably would have been shaking in my boots. My confidence was definitely a lot better going into internship because during practicum, it was the same professors I had for the 2 years before that. And so it was definitely easier to put those skills into action, knowing that they would be the ones looking at everything. And then going into internship, I was kind of like, all right, now I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts? Anyone have anything they want to add? I was going to shift, made me think of something else. One of the things I learned about the research project was that work samples were a thing. What does he mean by that? Getting a recording in some kind of way of your work with a client and that kind of thing creates a different set of dynamics around feedback, around, you know, uh, does the audio or video lie, right? There's the evidence. There's you doing the thing, saying the thing. There's your face and your body. There's the clients and stuff like that. So it creates its own effect within the supervision process on the instructor, on the student, and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of biases and effects to come into play by just using the work sample, especially as it relates to student anxiety. Can anyone relate to this? Anyone feel this in any kind of way? Agree? Disagree? Did you have to do work samples or review them now?
I have a perspective of a current student. I'll be entering my practicum in the summer semester, and I'm in advanced skills with you, Dr. B, and we're starting to get our first practice client who are volunteers, and there is a huge mountain of anxiety, I would say, when I kind of think about, do I have the skill set already enough even to meet with this volunteer client who probably went through the program or something similar, who's going to be easier on me than like a client, out in the world. I constantly am wondering, am I yet prepared for that?
Mm. Thanks for sharing that, Nicole. And it makes me think about so for that particular class, it's like a pre-practicum class where Lauren, it's very similar in the sense that there's volunteer alumni or in some cases undergraduate students that are brought in to work with counseling students. And there, if you think about adult learning principles and think about this in your own studies, but your own work too, like post-degree or post-licensure. There, you might have a theories class or a micro skills class where you practice like reflecting or, paraphrasing or offering summaries. And now you're in a formal situation where you have to add another clinical task. I need to actually engage in a counseling process. And then later, I need to do more of a dress rehearsal that's going to look like work. So each time the skill and the demand level it increases, the structure of supervision decreases. Yeah, over time. It's an inverse relationship, which is no, there's no time. It costs money. Time is money and things like that. So it's like one of the things about the practicum supervision to point is that it's a type of first experience or training supervision, the structure of which is usually not going to happen for that student or professional the same way again. Does that make sense to everyone? And you may have some different experiences with that, but from my perspective and my experiences working with that, it's often an opportunity where you may be working with clients, but there is still some quote safe space or safe classroom space and structure and access to peers and an instructor to process in more detail, more frequently with using work samples, which that sometimes will go away too, or go away definitely when you're on a site. The level of time that it takes to prepare, consume, interact with and use those types of samples in your own practice is it's tough to be able to continue to do that. So the assumption is folks are going to become more self-directed in a way in their learning that they're going to be able to abstract that or visualize that or do that through consultation in verbal kinds of ways. It's an assumption that's still part of practice. So my hope, and one of the reasons for this research is that is there something from experiences that can be structured that way and consider individuals' learning styles that can have some lasting effect on a person's ability to self-direct their learning, to become their own supervisor, if you will, or their own independent individual to consume and consult and use different things. and seek out different things that can help them. And also not assuming that there's, if you did something for 15 years, I was an addictions counselor. Now I'm working with couples or working in family situations. That 15 years will transfer to some degree, but developmentally, all the equalizer columns are not going to fire the same way. So you have to cycle back to a place where you may need to consume, think about, integrate information, and how do you do that in a self-directed way? And so the idea is to get the people to learn about their learning and accept that things are going to change in terms of the structure and support that they have, but what can you take with you and what can you seek out? And hopefully they have a good experience in the practicum as a way to think about that. But I'll just close my comments by just saying that I think that it's really important for folks to learn the profession specific skills, but I think it's as important for them to understand how to learn, how they learn in their style and how they interact with other people. And, all of those principles of learning still come into play and need to operate. They're just transferred in terms of power and level of self-direction from instructors and classroom settings to individuals in real world settings. And if none of that is part of the process, then what happens? We don't know a lot about that. We wonder, we send surveys, but we don't really know. So, but the good news is each individual, if you stop and think about that process and think about on a meta level ways that you can continue to engage in your practice, you may do okay. I mean, but I don't know from large scale data if that's true. I know anecdotally, I know through consultations, I know through conversations with peers. I don't know where that is in the data for our profession. But I believe that there's prospect for it, and either way, it can be incorporated into your own practice. So that's where I'm at. Thank you for your time. Anyone have any other questions on our remaining, was it, Christy, 2 minutes?
You have 2 minutes.
Oh, all right. Well, thanks for being here.